Here's a video on why we should be training for longevity rather than training for short-term gains. When we see stuff on social media, we tend to follow the strongest on the planet, really. The good thing about it is that you can see what the strongest people are doing and if you can implement that in your training. However, the downside of that is that it makes yourself feel a bit mediocre, that you're not lifting enough or you're not working hard enough, which is simply not the case. Muscle dysmorphia starts coming into play, maybe even strength dysmorphia. That could be a new thing for powerlifting, is strength dysmorphia, where you don't think you're strong enough. But in the general public, people are like, oh, you're really strong. And then when you go to competitions and you're watching national competitions, or you're like watching Sheffield, and you go, actually, I'm not that strong. But to the regular person, when you say, oh, I can squat 200 kilos or I can bench 100 kilos, like, wow, that's amazing. But then when you go into the powerlifting realm, in the powerlifting community, people be like, is that all you're lifting? Blah, blah, blah. And I think powerlifters get stuck in the strength trap. I just want to hit PRs. If I'm not beating my last total, then I'm a failure. You know, think of it from a different perspective. How did it move? Did it feel better? Do you look bigger? Do you look stronger? That sort of thing, rather than just focusing on the weight, which is really hard as a powerlifter. It is really hard because you do want your total to get better. You want to improve your squat, improve your bench, improve your deadlift, and if you don't, it kind of makes you feel a little bit inadequate. But we need to try and change that. Instead of chasing PRs, let's chase something else, like how did it move? How did it feel? How does your body feel? All these play a big factor. So if you can focus on the internal stuff rather than the external stuff, you might feel a bit better. You get stuck in that trap of strength dysmorphia where you just want to get stronger and risking more injuries just to get stronger, and sometimes you got to take a bit of a step back. When you see lifters on, say, like open powerlifting, and they're like in the 40s, but they've been lifting since their 20s, you know they're doing something right because they have stuck at it for 20 years. They're doing something right because they can last that long. They are prioritizing movement, they are prioritizing their bodies. When you've got kids who are, 19, 20, 21, and you don't see them for years because they get injured, they go and, they're doing something else because they can't lift anymore. And I know there's a few people in the old tailors that were like this, really, really strong for like 2, 3, 4 years, had a lot of potential, and then they stopped powerlifting because they were always injured, and the bodies just couldn't take it anymore. So by prioritizing movement and being more mindful of what's going on with your body, because we do get a little bit obsessed with the weight. I was the same, so I know what it feels like, and I paid the price. I did me knee in. But let's try and redefine our fitness goals, or your fitness goals. Let's try and redefine what fitness is. So when you're 80 years old, will you look back at yourself if you can't walk, or you're in a wheelchair, or you're using a trolley to get by? Would you think that was still a good thing that you squatted 250, or was it just your own ego getting in the way of your longevity in life? Now, when I say longevity, yeah, you're living a lot, like you're doing something which is great, but are you going to be hindering yourself in 50 years time? But that's not to scare anyone, it's just to say don't overdo it. If you are really, really strong, however, if you're really strong and you're going to Worlds and you're going to Sheffield or world records, things like that, then that's fine. But for your mediocre lifters, if you're like, say for me, for example, I got invited to the Manchester Open once, and that was it. And I was quite far away from like the national total to get it to nationals in the IPF. It's a hard one, but if you're like constantly going to nationals and constantly going to worlds, it's a different story. But if you're like a mediocre lifter and you've been lifting for yonks and you're trying to and you're trying to keep up with these people that are going to nationals or keeping up with people that are going to worlds, you're going to get injured. Or from a psychological point of view, you're going to start taking something because you feel like you're not adequate and you're not strong enough to reach those levels. And that probably happens a lot more than you think. So let's try and introduce a concept of fit for life. When you're doing a training program, is this good for me? And that's why getting a coach might be a good answer for you, because they've been around the block a couple of times. They know different people from and different scenarios, and they will be able to help you and coach you better. So let's look at the pillars of different types of fitness that we can go towards to be stronger and to be fitter and healthier. So I think that number one, I still think strength, and I think the second one is your mobility, and I think the third biggest one will be your cardiovascular health. And to be honest, I can sing from the heavens. I hate running. I can't stand running. But I play football. I play football once or twice a week. So I have to try and do that. If you're not doing cardio, you should incorporate something like HIIT training, cycling, swimming, something just, to get your heart and your lungs working, just because that's just as important as strength. Can you incorporate some yoga into your training? Can you incorporate some running into your training if you are just doing powerlifting? Explore different avenues of fitness. So to sum this all up, what we need to be when we look back at our lives in 30, 40 years time, when we're 70, 80 years old, if you're in your 20s, again 50, 60, 70 years time, you want to be looking at yourself at 80, 90, still being vibrant, still getting out and still doing things. And will it be worth being in a wheelchair or being incapable of doing daily tasks for a 10 kilo PR? Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't have goals. You should have goals, and that's great, but you shouldn't be killing yourself to get to them goals. Stay strong, but don't kill yourself in the process of hitting obscure goals that it doesn't really affect your life in any way. You've got to be a little bit more proactive and think about what you're doing with yourself to make sure that your body will last you a lifetime, and that you can still go running, you can still go walking, jogging, hiking, pick up your shopping, things like that at 70, 80, and you don't need carers to get you out of bed, don't need carers to get you to have a shower. And I think that's gonna, what's the point in having the last 10, 15 years of your life being cared for and you're not living your life to the fullest? Like, you want to live your life to the fullest regardless if you're 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, and even if you get to your 90s, and even if you're so lucky to get into the hundreds. So build a body that lasts a lifetime.